Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us for this very important conversation that we're having today. I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Felice Gersh today about the health of your thyroid and how it can impact your overall anxiety levels. And Dr. Gersh is actually here. She's back due to popular demand after doing such an amazing job and having such an amazing presentation at the Mental Health Summit back in May. So I'm really encouraging you all to take advantage of this time with Dr. Gersh and have your questions ready so you can ask all your questions about hormonal health and the health of your thyroid. Before we get started, I wanted to ask you all to just go ahead and say hello and tell me where you're watching us from and how you're doing this morning. So just say hi. And we will have time to answer all of your questions as well as the questions that were posed on Instagram. So I will go ahead and ask those questions from Dr. Gersh. But if you have questions, we will have time at the end to answer those questions. So make sure you have them ready and wait for the end so that they don't get lost in the comments. Before we get started, if you're not familiar with me, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Nafisa Sekandari, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-based disorders. Before I bring on Dr. Gersh, I wanted to introduce her to you as well. Dr. Felice Gersh is a multi-award-winning physician with dual board certification in OBGYN and integrative medicine. She is the founder and director of the Integrative Medical Group of Irvine, a practice that provides comprehensive health care for women by combining the best evidence-based therapies from conventional, naturopathic, and holistic medicine. An active part of the PCOS community, Dr. Gersh works with the PCOS Awareness Association and is a member of the PCOS Challengers Medical Scientific Advisory Board. She speaks at the annual conferences of both nonprofit organizations. She's also a member of the AE-PCOS Society and has spoken multiple times at their prestigious academic meetings. She taught obstetrics and gynecology at Keck USC School of Medicine for 12 years as an assistant clinical professor, where she received the highly coveted Outstanding Volunteer Clinical Faculty Award. She now serves as an affiliate faculty member at the Fellowship in Integrative Medicine through the University of Arizona School of Medicine, where she lectures and regularly grades the case presentations written by fellowship students for their final exams. Additionally, she's sought after for a medical forensic expert and has worked on numerous high-profile legal cases. She's also the best-selling author of the PCOS SOS and PCOS SOS Fertility Fast Track. She's a prolific lecturer and has been featured in several films and documentary series, including The Real Skinny on Fat with Montel Williams and Fasting with Dr. Longo from USC. Excuse me. So let me bring in Dr. Gersh.
Well, hello. Hi there. So great to join you here today.
How are you? It's so good to have you back. I know you're fitting us in between patients, and I'm so honored to have you here.
Oh, well, I have many roles, and one is to see patients in my office. You're actually in one of my exam rooms right now. I scrambled to get all set up really quickly, but I love doing what we're doing, and that is reaching a wider group of people than I can possibly see one-on-one in my office.
Definitely. And I know that you were such a hit at the May presentation when you came for the mental health presentation. You were such a hit. Everybody was just raving about you and saying they wanted you as their doctor. So I'm so glad for you to come back and join us. Thank you.
Well, it's always a pleasure.
I'm so sorry about that. Hold on one second. So let's start with the thyroid, because I know your time is limited. The thyroid plays such an important role in our overall health and well-being, but it's not just, if it's not functioning properly, it can also affect our mental health, right? As well as our hormones. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Thyroid hormone, like many, but I would say thyroid is one of the ones at the pinnacle that links physical health and mental well-being. It's when you have a thyroid that's malfunctioning for any reason and your thyroid hormone level is too high or too low, you are going to suffer not just physical consequences, but mental, cognitive, and emotional. So yes, your thyroid gland is not optional for having quality health in every aspect.
So it is a very important, it affects everything, right? It plays a
It does.
huge role.
There are receptors for thyroid hormone on virtually every organ, of course, including the brain. That's why it's just so common to have such a wide array of symptoms when the thyroid hormone is off, either, like I said, too high or too low. And there's some very unique things about women and thyroid hormones because the thyroid hormone is very connected to our primary female hormone, estrogen. So when women's cycles are off, often their thyroid will also be off, and vice versa. So they're very, very connected. That's why, like I said, it links reproductive health, all of the issues in physical health, and also mental health. So it's really even a more special problem for women because of the interactions between our female sex hormones and the thyroid hormone.
One thing I find interesting is that when it's too high, it can cause anxiety. When it's too low, it can cause depression, right? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. And the reality is that those are the classics, but it can be a variety of those things. So you could have too much thyroid hormone and also feel depressed, but the classic presentation would be anxiety. So if you think of our body having this automatic or autonomic nervous system, where we have, like the Chinese always got it right, the yin and the yang, you have the push and the pull. So you have the balance of forces. And if you think about the autonomic nervous system, it has two components, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So when you have a lot of thyroid hormone, it activates the sympathetic, and that would be like you're revved up. So like the idea of the stress reaction. So if you're under stress and your body needs to react quickly to some threat, then your pulse is going to go up. You're going to actually start changing the way your organs function. So you're going to try to oxygenate your brain more. You're going to be on high alert. You're going to put out more cortisol, and you're just going to be in this hyper state. That's what happens when you have high levels of thyroid hormone. Like you're always in that revved up state. So it's a fine line between being excited and being anxious. So if you're chronically in a state of upregulation, you're going to feel anxiety. Now, the opposite, when your thyroid is on the low end, it's more like the sympathetic is suppressed. And therefore, everything goes into more slow motion, including your brain. So you're going to feel more sluggish, tired. You're going to have poor quality sleep. You may be achy, constipated, and depressed. So if you think of sort of revving up is hyperthyroid, and slugging down and getting sort of slowed down is hypothyroid. So women who get hyperthyroid will often lose weight. They'll get tremors. They'll feel jittery along with the anxiety. And then the hypothyroid, they gain weight. They get sluggish, like I mentioned, they're tired all the time, and they may feel cold, whereas the hyperthyroid group will feel hot. Now, these are people who have the more extremes, like I'm mentioning, because there's lots of middle ground where people have very mild symptoms. I'm just sort of telling you sort of the more exaggerated symptoms. So it's often more subtle than that. And you may feel this low level of tension or anxiety, but you're not like bouncing off the walls, or you just may feel kind of down and sort of sluggish. So we have to think of thyroid disease as a spectrum in terms of its manifestation. So you could be textbook or you could be something much more subtle than that.
Wow, there's so much to know, and this little butterfly, what is it, an organ, I guess, in our throat can do so much, and we take it for granted until something goes wrong, right? Until something isn't functioning the way it's supposed to. But what can we do to make sure that our thyroid is healthy and that we are taking care of it? What are some steps that we can take to make sure that we're being preventive instead of reactive, I guess?
Well, there's a whole array of things that we can do. The first thing is to recognize that the thyroid gland, when it's malfunctioning, hyperthyroid, for example, also known as Graves' disease, which is a multi-organ system condition, it's an autoimmune disease. And hypothyroidism is often also autoimmune, what we would call Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So autoimmune diseases of the thyroid are very prevalent, and women are the victims of 80% of autoimmune conditions. So thyroid disease can occur in men, but it's far more prevalent in women. So first is to recognize that you, if you're a female, are in the risk group for having thyroid dysfunction. Next, recognizing that much of thyroid dysfunction is autoimmune based. And we now know that autoimmune diseases begin by having a barrier in the body that's malfunctioning, allowing toxins or bacteria or viruses to enter the body. The biggest such interface is the gut. So caring for your gut is so critical to having a healthy thyroid gland. And of course, reducing your risk of other autoimmune diseases. The most common autoimmune disease of women is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which produces initially sometimes a little bit of hyperthyroidism when the thyroid gland gets inflamed and then settles into a hypo or low thyroid status. So nurturing your gut microbiome is so critical to being proactive and preventative for maintaining thyroid health. And the way we do that is by choosing foods that our microbes love, and that's fiber foods, so often neglected. But now there's actually data showing that healthy fats also help to maintain a healthy gut microbiome. So we would be talking about having lots of root vegetables, whole grains, and lots of green leafies and all the colors of the rainbow. Because it turns out that the special, I call it the special sauce that's in vegetables and fruits, the polyphenols, are also really important for maintaining a healthy gut microbiome and maintaining healthy fats in your diet, like omega-3s, which are often deficient, which we get from fish, or many of us are not eating a lot of fish for a whole slew of reasons. So then high quality omega-3 supplements, and then eating healthy raw organic nuts and seeds for the healthy omega-6s that we need to have in balance with our omega-3s. So having the right diet to nurture our gut microbiome is so important. And then next with that would be timed eating. It turns out that our microbes, to maintain health in the gut and maintain the healthy barrier so that we don't have leaky gut, where you have toxins in the gut getting into the body itself, means that you have to feed the gut microbes at the right time. We have different populations and different functions of the microbes at different times of the day. So starting your day with a really healthy breakfast, and I don't mean traditional Western American style breakfast. I'm talking about lots of vegetables, beans, legumes, and such, that we start our day with a big, beautiful breakfast that gets our microbes so happy in our gut. And that is one of the best ways to start creating health in our gut. And then the other for the thyroid is to feed it some of the foods that we often leave out of our diet, like selenium, which is a trace mineral. And most people are not getting that much. If you eat a really balanced diet, you're going to get enough. But right now, in the era of COVID, a lot of people are taking a little bit of selenium supplementation, which I encourage as well, like 100 to at most 200 micrograms a day of added selenium. But there's a great food that you could eat, and then you don't even have to take a supplement. And that's Brazil nuts. So it turns out that there's a lot of selenium in Brazil nuts. If you eat 2 or 3 Brazil nuts, and I ate 3 last night and I love them, but if you do that, you're going to get lots of healthy selenium, which is totally needed by your thyroid gland. And then the other missing mineral is iodine, which used to be abundant in the earth and came into our plants, but now because of depletion of iodine in the soil, and we're not eating a lot of seafood from the oceans where we get the other source of iodine, many people are iodine deficient. In fact, there's been noted that the whole world is probably iodine deficient. And that's why about 100 years ago, they put iodine in salt. And the reason was that they noted that people, particularly in the Midwest of the US, developed very large thyroid glands called goiters because they lacked sufficient iodine. Well, they figured that out 100 years ago, but fast forward to today, it's like they completely forgot. And no one is eating a lot of iodized salt. that I know, it's not really encouraged that you eat a ton of salt. They used to add a lot of salt to people's diets back 100 years ago. Now we're trying not to add a lot of salt. So people are not getting their salt, their iodine from the salt. So where are they getting the iodine? Often from nothing. So you either have to eat seaweed or kelp. Those have plenty of iodine, or a lot of seafood. But beware, seafood now is full of mercury, other heavy metals, and plastic. So it's really hard. And also the world supply of wild fish is really downwardly declining. So we really can't like deplete our oceans of all the fish. So we can get healthy iodine from supplements. So that's what I recommend, a small amount of iodine. And you have to be careful. You do not want to overdose. The recommended amount is only about 150 micrograms or 200 for women who are pregnant or trying to get pregnant. But it's probably perfectly safe to go up to on average of 1 milligram a day. But there's some people that do hyperdoses of iodine, and I am against that. So that's a lot of information, I know, but the thyroid gland is worth it.
I am religious about my 2 Brazil nuts a day, and I know they're really good, and you want to eat more than that, but I don't want to overdo it. So 2 Brazil nuts a day, and they are expensive, but I'd rather
know
the nuts than take a pill. And then I add kelp powder to my smoothie.
You do? Yeah, good.
Enough?
Yep. It's kelp. Kelp is great, and for people who can get seaweed, you're doing just exactly what the doctor ordered. Very good.
My daughter is obsessed with seaweed. Is it possible to eat too many of those little packages of seaweed? She just loves her seaweed. She calls herself at the school.
I don't think there's any documented overdosing of those little seaweed strips or little squares, but it probably could be done. Like anything on this planet, you can get too much of a good thing. So I would probably limit it to maybe 5 a day. I think that, that's quite a bit right there. But, I think that the thing about iodine from food is that it's never the same. Our bodies seem to process, just like even with Brazil nuts, process nutrients that come from food very differently than when we take them as boluses from supplements. And I recommend a lot of supplements, but I am very foundationally into basics from food as much as possible, because like there's magic when you put all of that together into the food. It's really different than when you try to break it apart and take it as separate little items.
Right. Yeah, no, she doesn't eat like more than 2 a day.
Oh, then she's good. I thought she was like going crazy with it. Yeah, but that's fine.
It's so funny how she like introduced all her classmates to seaweed. And at first, I remember when she was in kindergarten, they made fun of her for bringing it to school, and then everybody got into it. And now you see it everywhere. Everybody sells seaweed, which is awesome.
That is great. Now, it's always hard to know. Everything is relative risk, but if you can know the source. One of the things I also am concerned about, some of the little seaweed squares have like oil coating, and I don't know what that oil is, so that's another good reason to, if possible, to go and eat fresh seaweed salad, like from a Japanese restaurant too, to sort of supplement the sort of packaged seaweeds.
We've also bought our own sheets that you can make your own and use your own oil to bake them in the oven. So
that's fantastic. Well, I'm going to take lessons from you on how to do that, because I have never done that. That sounds amazing.
Well, it's feeding the addiction that my daughter seems to have.
It's better and probably more affordable.
Probably, yeah. So I just wanted to get into some of the questions. I did ask yesterday for people on Instagram to submit some of the questions that they have, just so we can have something. One of the people that asked, she said her TH4 level is normal, but another part isn't. So she's feeling sluggish and wondering, is that normal?
So, well, there's a load of reasons why somebody could feel sluggish, and it's not always going to be hypothyroidism. But this brings up the question of what are thyroid tests that should be ordered. So I like to get pretty comprehensive thyroid tests. I like to get the TSH, that's thyroid stimulating hormone, that comes from the pituitary gland. That is getting signals from the brain to tell the thyroid gland whether to make more or less thyroid. And so that's why they call it stimulating hormone. When you have high levels of TSH, it means that the brain is perceiving that your thyroid is too low and you need to make more, and so the TSH goes up. If it goes up too high, then it shows that your thyroid gland is probably not responding well, and therefore you are developing either subclinical or even overt hypothyroidism. If the TSH level is very low and what we call suppressed, then that means your brain is perceiving that you have too much thyroid and it's trying to suppress the production. And if your thyroid is doing that and you're not taking exogenous, like you're not on supplemental thyroid, in which case it means that you're probably taking too much. But if you're doing it naturally, that can be the first sign, even before you have symptoms, that you're developing hyperthyroidism or too much. Now, so when I get tests, I would get the TSH, and then I want to get a free T4 and a free T3. Now, free, what that means is it's the unbound portion of the thyroid. So it's telling me what's actually available to your tissues. And so I also want to get antibodies, the anti-TPO and the thyroglobulin antibodies, because autoimmune thyroid disease is so prevalent. And as I mentioned, it's the most common of all the autoimmune conditions and so common, particularly in women. So that would be my foundational group of thyroid testing. Now, if you have one of them normal, like say your T4, your free T4, and you can get total T3 and total T4, and they're interesting, but it's not telling you what's available. But say your T4, whether free or total, is normal, but you feel sluggish. Well, there's a few different possibilities. Perhaps your T3 is actually too low. So there's, and because I did mention I want to get free T3. So the way that it works in the body is that you have a storage form of thyroid that's called T4. Okay, that's thyroxine. So you have T4, and then it's converted through the enzyme into T3. So T3 is the active form of the thyroid hormone that actually works on the cells to create all the different amazing processes that thyroid hormone is known to do. So T4 is like the storage form, T3 is the active form. If you have antibodies against the enzyme thyroid peroxidase or other types of enzymes that may be important for the conversion of T4 to T3, you can have a normal T4, but a subnormal, too low T3, and therefore essentially you're hypothyroid. And if you don't test the antibodies, if you don't test the T3 level, you will be misdiagnosed as being normal when you're actually hypothyroid. So that's why you need the full array and the proper interpretation of the results.
Whoops. I just removed you accidentally. Sorry.
That's okay.
So then you kind of answered this question, Cami, to ask, what test does one take? Do you just go in and say, I just want will they automatically add the free, the free thyroid, whatever you just said? Will they automatically do it, or do you have to ask?
Okay, so here's the problem. Although there are published articles talking about the inadequacy of just getting a TSH, many endocrinologists, internal medicine, and family practice doctors will only order a TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, in a perfect world, maybe that is all you need, because that is telling you what your brain is telling your pituitary, essentially. Should you make more? Should you make less? Or is it just right? So you would think that it would show you exactly what you need to know, but it doesn't, for a whole slew of reasons. Number one, the feedback to the brain is from T4, not T3. So you could have totally normal T4, but you're not converting it adequately to T3, and your TSH might be normal. As well, if you're in a chronically stressed state, there is another type of hormone called reverse T3 that can be produced in lieu of T3, and actually blocks the receptor for T3. And you will feel tired and functionally have low thyroid, even though your T4 and TSH are fine. So the way that it works is you have T4, and it can be converted into T3, the active form of thyroid, or its mirror image, reverse T3. Now, the body makes both, and for good reason, because if you are like not eating, you don't want your intestines to be doing too much. So you want to quiet them down, especially, for example, at night, or if you don't have a lot of food coming in. So the body uses T3 and its mirror image, reverse T3, to sort of turn on and off organs. So, for example, T4 is like going to be sitting there, and then it's called upon into action to make something, reverse T3 or T3, depending on the situation. So if you don't have food, if you are under stress, you will make a lot of reverse T3. Reverse T3 fits into the same receptors that T3 does. And therefore, they are sort of competing for the same receptors. So if you have a lot of reverse T3 and you don't have enough T3, you're going to knock out the T3 from getting onto the receptor. Now, nature does this on purpose. That's why people who are chronically stressed can be tired, sluggish, constipated, and gain weight. But the solution for that isn't to throw thyroid hormone at those people, is to work on the stress. Okay, so if you have high reverse T3, which occasionally I measure, then that's a sign that your body is under some sort of chronic stress state. So the bottom line is that you really need to treat each person individually, and you need someone who recognizes what all these different things are, what they mean, and how they can be manifested in the patient as various symptoms. And it's very sad, but our conventional medical system doesn't seem to want to get sort of on track with this. And still, many doctors will just order TSH, or occasionally they'll order free T4, but they're not routinely. It's not routinely recommended to do what I do, which makes sense and is in the literature. That is to get the entire array of thyroid testing. Now, if you have someone that feels great, has not a symptom, is fit, and everything is going great, maybe that's okay. You don't have to get every test. But if you have someone who's having symptoms, they really aren't feeling well, they're sluggish, they're tired, moody, then you definitely want to get the full panel of all these different types of thyroid measurements so that you can fully understand what's happening and then take proper steps. For example, we now know that people who have low T3, which may be because, or low T3 function because they're making a lot of reverse T3 and they're stressed, they're going to have a lot of depression because, like we mentioned, low thyroid will give you depression. And so by understanding the mechanisms in the body, we can help people to overcome some of their problems because they'll understand why things are happening, which I think is so important for people not to be told, just take this, but rather, if you're going to tell someone to take something or to do something, for them to understand what the goal is, what the mechanism is in general, and what they can hope to accomplish. Because I don't think just telling people, that old idea of just handing something out and saying, just take this with no other explanation, it just won't fly anymore.
But unfortunately, that is what happens. And I know when you get tested with a conventional doctor, they don't even explain to you that the range for a healthy TH4 or whatever the levels are is so wide, and we're not supposed to be on the higher end of that wide spectrum, right? And they don't explain that to you.
Well, they also don't understand what it even is, and that you're absolutely right. It's very frustrating because what it is, when you have a lab test, you get what's called a reference range that goes with it. And like you mentioned, the reference range can be incredibly huge. So how could it be that someone at the very lower end of the reference range is just as great in terms of their shape and everything as someone who's at the very high end of the reference range? And that's because the doctors even don't understand how a reference range is obtained. What they do is they test about 2,000 random people who say they're okay. We don't even know that they are okay. They just think they're okay. And this is what they get. So it's 95% of all the tests they run on about 2,000 people, the bottom number is the bottom 2.5 percentile, and the top number is the top 97.5 percentile. So you have 2.5% of people scored below the bottom number, and 2.5% of people scored above the top number. So it's 95% of everyone tested. Well, I can tell you 95% of everyone is not in perfect shape. So what we are looking for is not just, are you in this reference range, but are you optimal in your result? And that's what you're getting at, which is absolutely right. But here's a good measure that you can go by if you have no clue and your doctor has no clue. So if it's something that you really want, you probably do not want to be at the bottom of the reference range. If it's something that you don't want, for example, elevated liver enzymes, you don't really want to be at the top of the reference range. But a safe bet is to say, be in the middle of the reference range. You can't go too far wrong with that. So if you get a test result and you don't really know what's optimal, but you're at the very bottom or the very top of the reference range, that may be a warning sign that your doctor may not even pick up, because the doctor says, oh, it's in the normal range. That's not a normal range. That's a reference range. And by the way, the reference range can change as a society becomes more unhealthy, because they're still just testing 2,000 random people. So you know now that almost 80% of people in the US are overweight or obese. So the reference range, 95% of people in any particular community that you test, the reference range for BMIs are going to be way higher now than they were 50 years ago. That doesn't mean that it's still okay if you're at the top end of the reference range, because in some places, the top end of the reference range, 95% of people's BMI might be well into the 30s, which means they're clearly obese, and that you're in the reference range, so that's normal. So it's really important to also understand that reference ranges change as populations change, and as we become an unhealthier population of people, our reference ranges will just go up or down, but it doesn't mean we're still healthy. So it's we really have to think about what's optimal. And the way that you do that is they try to get more like a healthy 25-year-old, a bunch of them, and then see what their levels are rather than just random 2,000 Americans.
Right. It just reminded me of the bell curve when it comes to intelligence, right?
Right. Perfect.
Yeah, 100 used to be average, like maybe even now it's considered average, but as our cognitive abilities decline, and then all of a sudden 80 becomes average, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good to be within the average range in that range, right? And that's a situation. So it's the same thing with the thyroid.
Absolutely. I do that with test scores all the time. It's like you don't want to be, if you did a math proficiency exam in a big city, and you wouldn't want to be at the bottom end of that reference range for proficiency in anything, right?
Exactly. So Sarah appreciates the information. Thank you for the comment, Sarah. If you guys have questions, now's the time. You guys can go ahead. As I'm going through my Instagram questions, you guys can go ahead and put them in in the comment section so that we can make sure that we have time to answer them. Another one is, how do I naturally cure hyperthyroidism, and what can I do if my thyroid is enlarged and it hurts when I swallow?
Wow. Well, if you have an enlarged thyroid gland and it hurts when you swallow, that definitely needs to be seen by a physician. Okay, so that's not something that you can just handle on your own, because I don't know what's going on. Unfortunately, thyroid cancers are enormously more now than they have ever been. There are different theories. It could be nutritional deficiencies like trace minerals, or theories is that we just do things that we never used to do, like lots of children get dental x-rays and that type of thing. That's not, I want everyone to have untreated cavities, but maybe we don't need to have quite as many dental x-rays during the developmental years, like for children and so forth, and just trying to be cautious about that. But in women also are more the victims of thyroid cancer. Maybe it has to do with having a lot of mammograms, because radiation, but for all the different reasons, some we really don't know. Thyroid cancer is far more prevalent now than it has ever been. So that is one possibility. Another is that you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So in the very beginning stages, that's why they call it thyroiditis. The thyroid gland is literally inflamed and it gets enlarged. It's really sore to the touch and can get enlarged, like I mentioned. So that is one possibility as well. And then there is also Graves' disease, which I mentioned, which is hyperthyroidism. And that also is going to cause an inflammatory state in the thyroid gland too, because autoimmune diseases are inflammatory. So you need to be diagnosed and you need to be checked. You probably would need a thyroid ultrasound, sometimes other thyroid imaging. You want to know if you have nodules or if it's a diffuse enlargement. So please, this needs to be checked out.
Definitely. No, that sounds, if it's enlarged, it definitely needs to be looked at. Sarah asks, is there a correlation between hyperthyroidism and gluten? She finds that cutting gluten from her diet makes her feel better. Is there a connection between the two?
Absolutely. It goes back to what I started out talking about, which was gut health. So unfortunately, many genes that were supposed to be lying dormant are being activated, that we call epigenetic expression. Like sort of like the genes are being modified in terms of how they are expressing themselves. 40% of the population have the potential to develop gluten autoimmunity and gluten sensitivity. So that's a pretty high percent. Now, in the past, it was really not too common because we didn't eat as much gluten and we didn't have as much processed food and chemicals in our diet that sensitized us to the gluten. And now we have gluten in everything because they break it into little particles and they use it as a filler, a thickener in so many processed foods. People aren't even aware of all the things that have gluten in them. So if you develop leaky gut and you have that gene that can make you potentially sensitive to gluten, autoimmune, or sensitive in other ways, for which there aren't even any tests, I guess the test of life, then you can develop this problem with gluten. And the gluten can irritate the intestinal lining, and it can create this problem where you can have either exacerbated leaky gut, or also known as the real name, impaired gut barrier function, where the single layer of intestinal lining, which are cells that are together, they become more separated, and then the internal contents of the intestinal tract can actually leak out into the surrounding tissue that we call the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, where there's a lot of immune cells, and you can have particles of food, you can have toxins from the gut, you can have pieces of bacteria get in. And it turns out that the bacteria or particles of them that break into the abdominal tissue there that has all the lymphoid tissue, the immune cells, that the immune cells start making antibodies to try to attack these invaders. That's how the immune system sees this stuff coming through the leaky gut, as an invader. Well, it turns out that the proteins, the DNA and RNA of the invading tissue, or the little particles that are coming in, can be very similar to our own tissue DNA and RNA. So it's like a case of mistaken identity. And this now is recognized as one of the underlying causes of autoimmunity, that our bodies are doing what they're designed to do, try to fight an invader that's coming through this leaky gut. And then what happens is the antibodies that are designed to attack the invader cross-react with our own tissues. Essentially, it's a self-attack, or like friendly fire. And the thyroid gland is one of the most common of all the organs that gets caught in this crossfire. And then depending on the invading organism or the toxin that's getting in, it could turn into hypo or hyper, depending on the type of antibody that's being produced. So I recommend every one of my autoimmune patients, regardless of which disease they get, because the disease is determined by what is getting in and what's activating the immune system. But the process is really the same for all of them. It's an impaired barrier in the body. And as I mentioned, the gut is the biggest barrier between the outside world and the inside world of our own bodies. So eliminating gluten is a primary step that everyone with autoimmune disease should take, even if they don't have antibodies to gluten, because of gluten sensitivity, for which there is no test except the test of life. So everyone should go gluten-free, processed food-free, alcohol-free. The first step in healing the gut is remove. We remove things that irritate or are toxic to our intestines. So gluten is top of the list. So sorry for gluten lovers. Gluten should be taken out of your diet indefinitely if you have an autoimmune condition, including hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease, or Hashimoto's.
I know a lot of people that have taken it out and they've felt better. So that's a really good one. I did want to ask about the tyrosine supplement. Could you take that to support your thyroid, or is that not recommended?
You know, it's in the thyroid supplement that I recommend. I think it's the lowest of the priority items because most people will get tyrosine from the protein. So tyrosine is an amino acid and it's essential for making thyroid hormone. So we definitely need it. The reality is that most people are not tyrosine deficient, but it's not going to be harmful. And just in case, it's usually added into a thyroid support supplement, like including the ones that I use. But it's probably the least of all the things you need because most people get enough of the tyrosine from the protein foods they eat.
Good to know. Thank you. So another question we had was postpartum thyroiditis. She wants to know the causes and whether it's natural to have that postpartum.
Well, it's not natural. It's an immune dysfunction. And so pregnancy is a very unique state. And all women, when they become pregnant, develop leaky gut. Now, that's not nature's accident. That's on purpose. It's one of the only times in life when nature wants you to have leaky gut. And the reason for that, and it should be self-limited, it should be sort of like under control, is because your gut microbiome changes when you're pregnant and it becomes a little bit abnormal in the sense that we wouldn't want it if you were not pregnant. But what that does is it creates some of the little bit of toxic particles, just a little bit, that comes out and creates a low-grade state of inflammation. Now, you think, why on earth would nature want a pregnant woman to have inflammation? Well, because inflammation causes insulin resistance. Now, when you're pregnant, especially if you think about in ancient times when food was really scarce, it was so critical for pregnant women to put on weight. They needed to put on fat, both for themselves and to have storage of fat to feed the baby while if the baby is in utero, in case there's not food around, like a small famine, or an afterwards when they're breastfeeding. So that's why women who are pregnant will gain weight even if they don't eat more food. But nature wants them to eat more food as well. So when you're pregnant, you become mildly inflamed and mildly insulin resistant. So what that means is that your blood sugar levels are going to go up because it takes more insulin for the job to be done. So when the blood sugar goes up, that makes it more available to the baby. So you're feeding the baby. And when you have more insulin present, you are going to store and make fat better. So insulin is the hormone that promotes the production and storage of fat. That's why diabetics, of course, have that problem. But in pregnancy, you're really living on the edge. And that's why if you're not really metabolically healthy, in pregnancy, you could get preeclampsia, gestational hypertension, gestational diabetes, whereas you would never get that if you weren't pregnant because of the changes that occur with leaky gut. Now, and you have a whole different array of hormones. You have high levels of the estrogen, estriol, produced from the placenta. And estriol has what we call beta estrogen receptor agonist. So it works on the beta receptor, which actually causes an antagonism of the alpha, which is on the immune cells. So you're actually downregulating your innate immune cells so that you won't attack and kill your baby. So you're altering the way the immune system functions. Now, after you deliver, now you're postpartum, you don't have any estrogen because you have high levels of prolactin so that you can breastfeed. So you have a whole new hormonal environment. But now you don't have the estriol by the placenta. So your immune cells are no longer suppressed. So if you are prone to developing an autoimmune condition, you now have like the worst situation because you still have a leaky gut that hasn't really healed and you don't have the estriol to calm down your immune system so that they're not on the attack mode And so if you're prone to developing autoimmune, you can have a really bad flare or develop a brand new autoimmune disease during the time following the baby's delivery, the postpartum time. So when you are pregnant, most autoimmune diseases are suppressed. But after you deliver, new ones will arise if you're in that propensity kind of a state, or if you have them, they will often flare.
Wow, pregnancy really does a number on our body, doesn't
It
it?
does. That's why I emphasize that every woman should be optimally healthy before she conceives. And that also is not really spoken of enough in our society, because pregnancy is the ultimate stress test of a woman. And then postpartum is another unique stress test. And we know that postpartum depression, which we deal with, right? Postpartum depression is prevalent much more in women who have nutrient deficiencies to begin with, like magnesium deficiency is a big one that can then trigger postpartum depression, because they don't have the reserve and the resiliency that they should have.
Exactly. No, I'm with you here. Yes, so much knowledge with Dr. Gersh, and this is why she's so popular when she comes in and talks, because, and Sarah also says thank you, because you share so much information that we don't have. And we need to, like with anything, it's a lifestyle change. We need to make, if when we're taking care of our gut, when we're taking care of our organs, when we're changing our lifestyle, getting enough sleep, eating what we're supposed to, we're not going to struggle so much with depression, with anxiety, with attention and concentration, with sleep disorders. All of that is our body
Right.
screaming, reset yourself, get on the right path, and do what you need to do to keep yourself healthy. When you said the gut is where it all starts.
Absolutely. And it's so poorly harness this information, because still many people that are trying to do their best in the psychiatric field, they are forgetting the connection between the body and the brain. And the brain is an organ that needs everything and more, right? It needs more energy, and it needs more nutrients, it needs more antioxidants. And so if you have a gut that's inflamed, if you have nutrient deficiencies, it will always manifest in the brain. And cognitive and mood are completely interlinked. So if you have brain fog, you're more likely to have mood problems, and vice versa, because it's one brain and it's kind of work well in all aspects or not. And so if there's one organ in this body that we can't let go, and treat without any great care, it's the brain. Because even if your heart is beating, right, if your brain isn't working, you have no quality of life. So that's why you always have brain first, right? I would always when I was teaching about the estrogen and progesterone are neuroprotective hormones, because a lot of people don't realize that. They think somehow they're bad for the brain. It's like, no, these are neuroprotective hormones. So I always want to say, if somebody comes from another country, like an alien, not a country, another planet, and an alien from another planet, and they say, we want to experiment on just one organ, say, not my brain. So, like if the body snatchers come, say, leave my brain alone.
Well, also the amazing thing is that the brain and the gut constantly talk, and they're constantly connected. And so, not my gut either. Leave that
Well,
alone.
we don't want to do, right. We don't want them to experiment on any organ. But what you said is so fascinating, the interconnectivity between the central nervous system, the CNS, and the enteric nervous system, which is the complex neurological system of the gut, and how they link in both hormonal ways, other humoral ways, the small chain fatty acids that are made by the fermentation, and also by that incredible nerve, the vagus nerve, that really helps to keep us calm. And so that's why mind-body medicine is good for the gut and it's good for the brain. And it's bidirectional. And that's why when you have thyroid dysfunction, you'll almost always get gut problems, either constipation or diarrhea. If it's low, you get constipation. If it's high, you get diarrhea, and you'll have mood disorders, right? So you have depression or anxiety. So everything is bidirectional, and it's amazing, like you said, the connection between the gut and the brain.
Yes, Amazing. I know we're coming close to our time, and I know you have patients probably waiting for you. And I want to just ask one more question. Genevieve asked, what to do if your blood test shows normal thyroid ranges, but your nodes have swelled up and the doctor has confirmed there's a non-cancerous lump related to the thyroid, but they can't say why? It's kind of a heavy question.
Well, so there are different types, well, like basically two types of thyroid nodules. Thyroid nodules that are producing thyroid hormone, and we call those hot nodules, and thyroid nodules that do not produce any kind of hormone. So we call them cold nodules. So we now, with the amazing imaging technology that we have, we are pretty much able to determine whether thyroid nodules are suspicious for cancer of the thyroid or not. So there's a beautiful now criteria that's all laid out for the radiologist. When they look at an image, a thyroid ultrasound image, they can look based on all these criteria and then determine based on the blood flow to it, the shape of it, the size of it, and all these different factors that they look at, whether this nodule that's on the thyroid gland looks suspicious or not. And then depending on the degree of suspicion, they would recommend following it by getting serial ultrasounds, forgetting it, saying this looks like nothing to worry about and it needs no follow-up, or it needs a biopsy. So we are in a very good state now with the way the imaging exists today, that just by doing that, they're pretty good at saying, leave it alone and forget it. You need to follow it, get another ultrasound in 3 months, or it needs to be biopsied now. That's really the only way to determine what that nodule is. So that needs to be followed with your doctor.
Wow. Do you recommend a hormone replacement for anything? Like, I know there are some supplements for thyroid, and there's some synthetic ones versus natural. Do you have anything to say about that, or?
Sure. Well, I prescribe thyroid hormone all the time because it's the most prevalent problem of women regarding the autoimmune situation. So hypothyroidism is very, very common. Of course, it's not always autoimmune, but it's very often so. Now, there's different types of thyroid that can be used. Now, I do not use glandulars, so but by that I mean like a glandular that's not a prescription, where you can have a supplement, because there are some companies that they grind up like a pig or a cow's like adrenal gland, or they grind up their thyroid gland or something like that. I actually don't use any of that because as an MD, I can prescribe more precisely what I'm giving. So the desiccated thyroid does come from a pig, and it's a combination of both T3 and T4. Now, the negative is that the ratio of T3 to T4 is not the same as a human. There's more T3 relative to T4. But for younger people, they often feel really good on the Armour or the NP. These desiccated, there's a few different brands that are used that some people feel so much better on them, especially people who may have antibodies and they're not very good converters of their storage form, the T4, into the active form, the T3. And then, oh, by the way, and then there's the other, which is using bioidentical synthetic T4. And then it comes in different brand names like Tyrosint and Synthroid, or the generic levothyroxine. And that's pure T4, and that's the conventional thyroid that's given typically by the endocrinologist. Mostly use that. Now, if the person can convert properly the T4 to T3, then just giving T4 works fine. It's only when they have a problem doing that conversion, and then they do so much better on the desiccated thyroid. But there's a little caveat. Once somebody gets older, particularly over 60, they probably should not be on desiccated thyroid anymore, because the GI tract changes as we age. And the desiccated thyroid is not time release. Like the T4 products, like the levothyroxine products, they're more time release. The desiccated thyroid is not time release. So as we get older and our stomach acid changes, digestive enzymes change, it's possible that it could be absorbed too fast, that it's not like, over time, that it's like it breaks down and you get too big of a bolus of T3 at once absorbed into your system, or T4. And you could end up having too high thyroid during one part of the day and too low during another. So that's when you get thyroid tests, and they're really bizarre looking. You have a really low suppressed TSH, but then you may also have low T3 and T4. And you say, how is this possible? How can everything be low? Because the brain is supposed to say, I need more or too little, there's too much or too little thyroid. And, it creates the TSH, it stimulates the TSH. And so if you have too little thyroid, the TSH should be high. So why would you have too little TSH and too little T4 and too little T3 all at once? That's because your desiccated thyroid is absorbing inconsistently. And the brain is remembering when you were too high, but now you're too low. And so the TSH is low, the T4 is too low, and so is the T3. So the bottom line is, as you get older, you probably should just go to a pure T4, and if needed, add a tiny bit of T3 back separately, either a product like Cytomel, which we have that we can make, liothyronine, or you can get it also from a compounding pharmacy. And even younger people sometimes can have that problem where they absorb the desiccated thyroid too rapidly or inconsistently. So that's where the art of medicine comes in, that you can't do cookie cutter medicine. I'm just telling you, no one should say the doctor gives the same thing to everybody, because everyone is unique in so many different ways. We have to monitor these things, and we have to look at how you, the patient, responds to the particular substance that you're being prescribed.
That makes a lot of sense. As far as the supplement that you said that's derived from the pig, there are a lot of religions that don't want anything to do with pig.
Right.
They're an alternative for them that they can use instead of that supplement.
Yes, that's the T4. So the pig one, the desiccated, is from the pig, but you can get T4, which is purely synthetic, but it's bioidentical. So it has the same formulation as what your body makes, the T4, but it's made in a factory. But your body sees it the same as if you made it. And it doesn't come from any animal whatsoever. And if necessary, you can supplement with a little bit of prescribed T3, that's liothyronine. And that also does not come from a pig, doesn't come from any animal.
Okay, that's good to know. So where can people find you? I know that you're very popular online. You have a wonderful, right now you're doing fasting, which is really good on your Instagram, and I've been following that. Where can people find, is it just Instagram, and where on Instagram can people find you?
Well, my Instagram is Felice Gersh. That's FELICEGERSH. So doctor with a period, Felice Gersh. And in September is PCOS Awareness Month. So I'm going to do a whole series of Instagram shows on PCOS in September. In terms of my practice, my brick and mortar practice, where I am right now, is in Irvine, that's Southern California. And I see patients here all day long, Monday through Friday, but I also do telemedicine visits. So I can consult and help people now anywhere through the magic of telemedicine. So, and my practice is called Integrative Medical Group of Irvine.
Let me add that to the comments so people can, Integrative Medical Group of Irvine?
Correct.
Are you taking new patients?
Every day. I think as soon as we finish this call, I have a new patient. Exactly. So I love seeing new patients and helping people. And I hear so many sad stories, and I would love to turn them into happy endings. So that's my thing. That's why I love fairy tales, but we can live the life that's a real fairy tale where we actually turn things around, and people can have that Cinderella story where they start out, not too great, and they end up, on top of the world. It is doable. So I'm here to give hope and help anyone that wants me, to try, because that's our mission.
Before you leave, what's the one thing you should all be doing right now to take care of our thyroid or hormonal health? I know this, I'm putting you on the spot, but what's the one definitive thing that you think we should all get started with?
Well, I think that really you should start with the foundations, which is nutrition. If you have to start one place, because I want everyone to do it all. I want them to have fitness and stress control and sleep and sunlight, and which is so important. And we live in our little cubicles. That's why I open the windows and as much as I can. But if you have to start somewhere, it's so simple and it's so basic. It's eat real food. Just don't do what the American, public is doing en masse, and that's eating processed foods. So it's farm to table, like the ancient people did. You eat from the earth, from things that are produced. So if you simply do that, even if you don't follow any particular diet, just eat real food, farm to table, no middleman factory, and just eat the best quality food, the colors of the rainbow. Your brain, your thyroid, every organ in your body will start to do better. So that's where I would start. When we want to start somewhere, that's what it is. The fork, the knife, the food, that's where we start.
A great foundational message to get started with. Thank you so much for taking the time and being here and talking to us. I learn so much from you every time you're here, and I know everybody else gains so much. So thank you for making the time and being here and joining us and answering all our questions.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. And everyone stay safe and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.